Good afternoon. I'd like to show you a way that you could get a new perspective on the world and through paddling, and a way that can help global warming. In her book, Braiding Sweetgrass, Robin Walkemer asked her class, "Does nature love you?" And of course, everybody raised their hand because everybody loves nature. And then she asked another question that was a little different. She said, "Does nature love you?" Now think about that a second. This begs the question, are we part of nature or separate from nature? Over 100 years ago, Herman Melville wrote Moby Dick, where man was pitted against nature, and more precisely whales, which were there to be killed. At that time, nature was dangerous and didn't love you. Since then, we've created these amusement parks for whales, whale amusement parks, and we've taught whales how to do our tricks that we teach them how to do. And we put them in whale pools that we made, and they're sort of like whale jails. Now, for this, we're closer to nature, but we're like grandstand observers. Now, the next step is to get right into the water with the whales. Here's a humpback whale swimming right towards my daughter and I. And at this point, we are in the whale's environment, and on the whale's terms. We felt very alive, but we didn't feel threatened or fearful. Now, any time you're in nature, it de-stresses you. And doctors are now prescribing just going into nature instead of taking drugs, because there's a lot less side effects. Now, being outside with a group of people paddling is a lot more fun than being in a gym. In Bellingham, the paddlers that I paddle with, we do beach cleanups, we do we do races, and we do kayak polo, which is a silly little game where we throw a ball and it's kind of like kayak basketball. But it's a fantastic way to be out with your friends and get a good workout. Now, I feel really alive when I'm in and surrounded by a living entity. The waves start actually playing with me on this, and if I get out of line and get too cocky, they'll slap me and make me wipe out. Now, you don't have to go into the ocean to paddle. There's a lot of places in the US, 70% of the population lives within 30 minutes of a place to paddle. And there's many lakes, rivers, and streams that are also very, very alive. Now, the ocean is really important because it's the birthplace of all life. It's also a very important food source for us. It drives weather patterns, and with warming oceans, the weather is becoming more severe. And this affects a lot of people in the world because most people live near the coastlines. Many cultures are going to be greatly affected by global warming. And in Micronesia, there's the rising sea levels and the more severe weather is going to make it more difficult for them to, it's already swamped many of their island communities because they're such a low-lying group. Now, who would think that whale poop would have a factor of making the earth or the ocean and be a benefit to global warming? But it feeds phytoplankton, and phytoplankton is responsible for consuming 25% of the world's CO2. It's about as much as the plants on land. And the important part about this is that the phytoplankton doesn't have to get watered like plants do, and there's a huge amount of space in the ocean to make this happen. Now, it's been estimated that a kayak, it's plastic from a kayak and and gasoline are all fossil fuel. So it's been estimated that a kayak takes about 15 gallons of gasoline to make it. And this is about probably the same amount of gasoline it took those people to get to the whale amusement park. So it's not very much. How much gas do you use? And how much fuel do you use? And is there a way to reduce it? Now let's look at the value of this. 15 gallons of fuel, it only costs $50 because it's a less refined resource. Whereas with a kayak, it's $500. So you get a lot more out of the same resources. When you put $15 worth of gasoline in your car, it goes about 150 to 750 miles, and then it's done. There's no recycling, it's done. Whereas with a kayak, it lasts for a lifetime, and the kayak can be 100% recycled. Now, cars get about 15 to 50 miles per gallon, and a speedboat, only gets about 3 to 6 miles per gallon. But kayaks are human-driven. So you have to have a fuel for the human. And it turns out a peanut butter and jelly sandwich fuels a human to drive the kayak about 20 miles. Not bad, huh? Now, you don't have to, whenever you're paddling a kayak, it feels like you're in a national park because it's like being in this watery wilderness. And if you had to go hike in a nice place to hike, you'd probably have to drive a long way to get to an actual national park. So it saves a lot of fuel. Everything is important, and it saves a lot of fuel to go to a closer place than a further away place. Now, I made a kayak recently that's a kayak and a paddleboard, and it fits inside the car. Now, if I was to have a kayak on top of the car, it would have a lot more wind resistance, and it wouldn't get nearly as good a mileage. But putting it inside the car like this, I get 56 miles to the gallon, which is really good. Every time, everything is important. In Bellingham, Washington, I paddle year-round, so this isn't something I just do in the summer. And if we spent more of our, we'd have less global warming if we spent more of our fuel into making things like kayaks with a higher value. Now, a lot more money gets spent on shooting whales with cameras from whale watching expeditions rather than having them shot with a harpoon. Now, I'll ask you again, bring up this thing again. How many people really love nature? Please raise your hand. That's a pretty easy one. And I won't push you on this next one, but I'll at least ask you to consider the possibility that nature might love you. Now, I have a story about my friend Roy. He sails a lot, and one day he was out sailing, and he was going on a long trip, and this humpback whale, it was a male, and it must have been kind of lonely because it snuggled up to his sailboat, and it stayed there for days, like I was saying, and it put its flipper right up on the deck, and Roy took a hammer and knocked one of the barnacles off, and the whale took his flipper and went right back, put it right back in the water. But then he realized what Roy had done. So he put his flipper back up there, and Roy knocked all the barnacles off. And then he went over to the other side, did the same thing to the other flipper. And it was sort of like a whale manicure. But I was amazed at how far we've come from the days of Herman Melville and the attitudes we have towards whales that we used to have when Moby Dick was written. And maybe Roy is the New Age Captain Ahab. Now, I might be reading too much into this, but when I get surrounded by a beautiful ocean like this, I can't help from feeling welcomed. If we are apart from nature, we'll be much more likely to exploit it. But if we're one with nature, we can protect one another. So, my wish is that we do cool activities like kayaking and keep the planet from heating up. Thank you.